Amazing janitor saves CEO from burning car. Her shocking first words exposed a hidden truth. The rain lashed against the windows, blurring the skyline of the city that crackled with ambition. Inside the high-rise, Sarah brushed the wet floor with the same intensity she brought to every corner of the office. But today, she was lost in thought, mulling over March bills and the cost of groceries. The reality of her $12 an hour wage felt suffocating as she wiped clean the glass that sheltered dreams beyond her grasp. Just then, a deafening roar outside shattered her moment of despair, pulling her back to the present with alarming force. She dropped the mop, her heart racing. Outside, chaos erupted. A car, engulfed in flames, roared and blinked like a dying star, and her pulse quickened. Fear clawed at her insides. What was she supposed to do? Her instinct screamed to flee. But then she froze, her breath catching as she recognized the man trapped inside. Mark Hastings, CEO of the town's most successful tech company, was at the center of the inferno, a life teetering precariously on the edge of a hellish fate. The gravity of her decision loomed large. How could she stand by? What if he died? Her children's faces flashed in her mind, their innocent dreams nudged her forward. If I can do something, the thought hung in the air, electrifying yet terrifying. She grabbed the fire extinguisher, its cold metal slipping into her palms, feeling heavier than the weight of her fears. Could she really be a hero? As she closed the gap between her drab janitor uniform and the bright lights of success, adrenaline surged through her, igniting a determination she never knew she possessed. Before she could second-guess, she was sprinting towards the wreckage, battling the smoke curling in her throat. Each step was a proclamation of defiance against every voice that ever told her she was insignificant. She slammed the extinguisher against the bulletproof glass, shattering it as the sound of nearby sirens blended with the crackling fire. There was no hesitation. She lunged, pulling Mark from the inferno just as the car groaned and exploded behind them. The crowd gaped, the street bathed in harsh light. Don't you recognize me? You taught me in high school. She shouted, her heart racing with the force of the revelation. There was an electrifying pause, then, silence. His eyes widened, wrestling with the shock of their past connection. The least likely savior had become his liberator. The faces around them twisted from disbelief to confusion. Was this woman really capable of such courage, or was her history simply dust beneath his polished shoes? Just then, as Sarah caught her breath, a question bubbled up under the surface. What did this mean for her? Would he acknowledge her, or would he forget this moment, sliding back into ignorance? The heavy truth of her existence pressed tighter against her chest. She waged war in her mind. She craved acknowledgement but loathed the idea of being defined solely by this act. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. But as the adrenaline faded, a new terror bubbled to the surface. What if the scholarship her daughter relied on slipped further from her grasp as others dismissed her feat, a mere act of bravery mistakenly assumed as a reflection of inconsequence? The tension rose, she felt the cold chill of doubt gripping her. Every moment fueled inner conflict as Mark stared into her eyes, a torrent of emotions churning in his mind. Sarah stood at the dizzying intersection of her past and present, her family's future hanging by a thread, uncertain if the acknowledgement she longed for could translate into real change. As shadows of doubt loomed larger, a letter slid under her door with a familiar crest, igniting a new instability that could redefine everything she fought for. Would this revelation be her salvation, or her ultimate demise? The path forward blurred with every heartbeat, leaving an urgent question: what sacrifices would she be forced to make now? The echoes of sirens faded into the distance, leaving a tense silence in their wake. Sarah stood rooted to the spot, Mark's incredulous gaze still piercing through her swirling emotions. For a fleeting moment, she anticipated applause, recognition, an acknowledgement of her potential beyond the confines of her cleaning uniform. Yet, as apprehension washed over her, the shadows of doubt grew into an unrelenting storm. "Are you okay?" Mark's voice broke through her reverie, his tone laced with concern yet laced with something deeper, as if he were trying to decode the enigma standing before him. "Yes, I'm fine," she lied, desperate to quell the trembling of her hands. You saved yourself." "I just helped." Mark's curious stare lingered as he processed the scene, recalling fondly his high school days filled with idealism, before corporate ladders blurred reality with ambition. But now, fate entwined their paths, flipping the script. "Is there somewhere we can go?" he asked, gesturing toward the noise of the crowd. "You shouldn't be exposed like this, not after." His voice trailed off. At that moment, a woman approached with a camera, capturing the unfolding drama. "Did you just save this man from a fire?" she pressed, urgency evident in her voice. "Not important," Sarah replied sharply, the instinct to protect her own anonymity surfacing. But as the truth of her actions settled, guilt stroked the edge of her pride. She had done something monumental, wasn't it worth sharing? Mark stepped towards her, mantle of authority shifting to reveal a shared vulnerability. "No one is going to forget this. You need to speak up. Tell people what you did." The notion felt foreign, yet tantalizingly appealing. What if this could lead to more than just a fleeting moment of valor? Perhaps it could be a breakthrough in her tired cycle of struggle, something more than the drudgery of cleaning offices after hours. Their conversation drowned in the murmurs of the gathering crowd, but Sarah's heart raced with each crescendo of voices. "You think people will care about my story?" she scoffed, fighting back the rush of emotions threatening to consume her. "Of course," Mark persisted, his confidence illuminating the spark of an idea deep within her. "You've been a hero, Sarah. You have something more inside you. Don't sell yourself short. You've already made an impact." His words nudged something dormant within her, then possibilities that had never crossed her mind. She fought to keep a straight face while battling an internal storm of fear and hope. Could she step onto the stage of life instead of living in the shadows? The ambition she'd buried beneath the weight of bills and chores now flickered to life. "I can't just transform overnight," Sarah finally admitted, her gaze now on the ground, betraying the tumult in her mind. "What if it's fleeting? What if I fail?" "Failure is part of the journey," Mark replied simply. "That doesn't lessen your worth." Caught in the web of self-doubt, she realized she'd spent too long trapped in a cycle of fear. Mark Hastings had just been reminded of a lesson from years ago, one she desperately needed to revisit: courage often lies beyond the boundaries of one's comfort zone. But amidst the encouragement, the cold letter loomed, a reminder of her responsibilities and the stakes involved. What would come from this moment? Would she take the leap of faith to redefine her narrative? The air was thick with unspoken choices, leaving her at a crossroads. As the crowd began to disperse, an idea dawned upon her, heavy yet exhilarating. Perhaps she could channel this experience into something, her voice woven into the fabric of a future she had almost resigned to forfeit. As she replied to Mark with newfound resolve, a subtle heartbeat resonated within, signaling that an unveiling had begun. "What if we can do something for those who feel unseen?" she proposed, a flicker of passion igniting in her chest. "Let us explore that," he replied, excitement edging his words. With newfound power coursing through her veins, Sarah felt the horizon stretching before her, a chance to not only change the trajectory of her own life but perhaps serve as a beacon for others, too. But as they discussed potential plans, the waiting letter nagged at her thoughts, threatening to break the fragile cocoon she'd begun to weave. What sacrifices would she need to make? What would she leave behind while she embraced this unforeseen destiny? And at that moment, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever awaited on the other side of this revelation might just change everything. Would she be ready for what lay ahead? Only time would tell. As the adrenaline from the chaos of the fire continued to ebb, Sarah and Mark found a quiet community coffee shop tucked away from the commotion. The fragrant aroma of freshly brewed coffee punctuated the backdrop of their conversation, grounding Sarah as she sifted through her tangled thoughts. Seated at a small table near the window, Sarah swirled the contents of her cup distractedly, her mind still racing. "What if I can't create something meaningful out of this?" she said, the doubt slipping through her lips despite her earlier resolve. "I'm still, just a janitor." "No, you're not just a janitor." Mark leaned forward, earnestness in his voice. "You showcased something real today. A part of yourself that most people hide. This is your opportunity to own that narrative." She looked at him, the flicker of unease igniting like an ember. The thought echoed, her narrative. What did that even mean? The grind of daily tasks, the laundry list of obligations, or the reality of her fragmented dreams? "Look," Mark continued, signaling her back to the present, "it's about more than just the fire, it's about the impact. You did something that most people wouldn't have the courage to do. What about the responsibilities that weigh on me?" Sarah interjected, her voice slightly raised, attracting inquisitive glances from neighboring tables. "Paying rent, struggling to make ends meet, can that bravery translate into something more? Or am I just hoping for a miracle? Courage isn't just about heroic acts, it can be about standing up for yourself, asking for more than what meets the eye. If you want to change, you have to believe you are worth that change." His words nestled deep within her, awakening a sense long suppressed. The thought of being heard, valued, even respected, began to seep into her consciousness, but the burdens of life loomed large. How could she embrace this revelation while carrying the weight of her responsibilities? The coffee shop buzzed with activity, yet all Sarah could hear was the cacophony of her own fears of failing, of losing the security her current life afforded her. The shadows of doubt inched closer, almost suffocating. What if I put myself out there and fail? What do I even have to offer? She confessed, the vulnerability in her voice palpable. Self-discovery and growth are complicated, Mark acknowledged, his voice steady. But embracing your story can be the very catalyst for change in your life. You don't need to have all the answers right away. Start small. Share your experience, begin a blog, speak to people who feel overlooked. You'll never know the impact until you try. Her heart raced at the prospect. A blog? It sounded far-fetched, yet there was a strange alluring thrill in the idea. "People might think I'm foolish," she said, her mind racing in every direction. "Or they might relate. You'd be surprised how many people are waiting for someone to say what they've been too afraid to voice," he countered, unwavering. Could it really change anything? Sarah questioned, wrestling with the allure of an unfamiliar path. Who would even listen to me? What if you listened to yourself? Mark said softly, pausing for a moment as if weighing his words carefully. What lies beneath the surface? You're more than the title of your job. Your story matters, and it's time you embraced it. A quiet moment settled between them, the implications of his words sinking in. Sarah felt a shift, the first tender tendrils of hope sparking to life. But as she contemplated the possibilities, the dreaded letter crept back into her thoughts, a dark reminder of her precarious situation. Would she risk everything for the chance to explore this newfound part of herself? What if the consequences were harsher than the rewards? Determination flickered, battling against her ingrained caution. I might have to make hard choices, she said finally, almost to herself. What if I push forward and it comes crashing down? Then you rebuild. It's messy, but that's life, Mark replied, the belief in his voice igniting something within her. They continued to discuss potential plans and the idea of a critical turning point in her life, but within Sarah's heart, uncertainty still clung like mist. Could she navigate this turning tide, holding on to her responsibilities while exploring the world beyond the confines of her cleaning cart? As she mulled over her potential choices, another thought surfaced, edging its way toward reality. What if I confront the organization that sent me that letter? What if I demand they recognize my worth? Mark raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Now that's a step toward reclaiming your story. As they discussed the implications of that decision, Sarah could feel a growing resolve brewing within. It was time to face the adversities holding her back, to address her fears with courage. But even as she felt that determination solidifying, another thought lingered at the periphery of her mind, a fear that perhaps too much change could be too much too soon. And as she made that critical decision to move forward, a question warned from within: was she truly ready to confront the unknown, or would it shatter the fragile foundation she had built? The following days blurred together as Sarah wrestled with her decision. Each morning, the sun crept through her window, illuminating the disarray of her life: stacks of bills, a cluttered kitchen, and a calendar filled with reminders of responsibilities that seemed to mock her ambitions. Her heart pounded every time she considered reaching out to the organization. What if they dismissed her as unworthy? What if they shut her down before she even spoke? Despite her fears, the thoughts of her conversation with Mark echoed in her mind. She couldn't ignore the rush that came from acknowledging her own story, from contemplating the possibility of change. To take control, she realized she needed a plan, a strategic path that would empower her to assert her worth. Determined, she set aside one afternoon to brainstorm and gather her thoughts. Sitting at a park bench with a notebook, Sarah jotted down key points. Define my value, she wrote, identify specific contributions to the organization. She paused, hands trembling slightly, as the implications of her musings took root. She had cleaned those offices with diligence, organized supplies, and maintained a level of professionalism that exceeded expectations. The tangible impacts were hers to claim, yet she had hidden behind the title of janitor for too long. That fear had trapped her. What if they invalidate my experiences, she muttered to herself, pressing the pen tightly in her grip. That mounting anxiety triggered a cascade of memories of moments when she had felt overlooked or unappreciated. Each recollection felt like an indictment of her hesitations. She needed to do more than confront the organization, she had to assert all that she had accomplished beyond her title. It was time to own her narrative, not just for herself, but for others who felt invisible in the same way. The adrenaline surged again, and she made a decision: she would draft a letter. Not just any letter, it would be a declaration of her expertise and worth. It would articulate her frustrations but also highlight her experiences, illustrating how her tenure had allowed her to observe the inner workings more than most knew. Days later, after much contemplation, Sarah finally typed out the letter, her fingers dancing over the keyboard as conviction surged through her. It was detailed, introspective, and candid. She hesitated at the end, wondering if she should add a personal touch about the fire, how that experience had been a catalyst for her wanting to speak out. In that moment of doubt, she realized that her vulnerability was not a weakness, but a powerful element of her narrative. After proofing and rewriting a dozen times, she finally hit send. Heart racing, she felt both exhilaration and terror. The deed was done, but what would the repercussions be? Over the next few days, her anticipation grew, with each hour dragging into the next. The initial thrill faded and was replaced by obsessive concern over what the organization would say, or if they would say anything at all. Each time her phone buzzed, a jolt of anxiety coursed through her. Would it be an email with a dismissive tone? Or worse, silence? Then, one afternoon, her phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. Like a bolt, fear surged through her. Should she answer? With a shaky breath, she tapped the screen, pressing the phone to her ear. A voice she recognized from the company greeted her. "Hello, Sarah. We received your letter and would like to discuss what you presented. Can you meet with us this week?" Her heart raced, a mix of alarm and exhilaration flooding her senses. This was her chance. But as she tried to muster the courage to respond, another thought emerged, louder than the rest: was she truly equipped to face them? Would they recognize her worth, or would this be another layer of rejection added to her past? It was time to determine just how far she was willing to go. Would she allow the fear of rejection to undermine her newfound resolve, or could she turn that fear into fuel? As she arranged the meeting, she couldn't shake the weight of impending confrontation. The moment had arrived. Would she emerge empowered, or would this pivotal encounter prove too burdensome to bear? The day of the meeting dawned, heavy with a sense of impending consequence. Sarah stood in front of her bathroom mirror, her reflection revealing a blend of determination and wavering confidence. She adjusted her blouse, its crisp lines contrasting sharply with the chaos of her home life, an unsettling reminder of her current reality. She took a deep breath, willing her heart to steady. On the drive there, she replayed the details of her conversation. What would she say? How would she frame her experiences? With each passing block, doubt gnawed at her resolve, an insistent whisper that perhaps her insights wouldn't be valued, that the weight of her story would falter against their expectations. As she pulled into the parking lot, she reminded herself of her purpose, to claim a voice in a space that had too often rendered her invisible. The meeting room was austere, with minimal decoration, cheap printouts of inspiring quotes hung awkwardly on the walls. The stark environment mirrored her anxiety. Gathering her thoughts, she focused on the rationale she had crafted within herself. Each point, every anecdote she planned to share, was a step towards reconstructing her identity. When the door opened, 3 individuals entered: Mr. Adams, the stern-faced CEO, a board member known for his aloof demeanor, and Maria, the compassionate HR representative who had often lingered in the backgrounds of company meetings. Sarah felt a swell of resentment at the hierarchy of it all, a stark reminder of the disparity in their perceived worth. Yet, that resentment ignited a fierce determination within her. "Thank you for coming, Sarah," Mr. Adams spoke, his voice authoritative but not unkind. "Thank you for having me," she replied, her own voice sounding steadier than she felt. They took their seats, and for a moment, silence filled the room as she gathered her composure. This was not merely a presentation of her past, but a deep exploration of how her value intertwined with the organization's mission and growth. "I've worked at this organization for several years," she began, her steady gaze meeting theirs, "but I want to talk about more than just cleaning. I've seen processes and protocols that can be enhanced based on my experiences on the ground." She launched into her thoughts with increasing clarity, discussing inefficiencies she had witnessed and the small yet impactful changes she believed could elevate the workplace. Her words flowed, and she allowed her passion to shine through. Each point was fortified by anecdotes, illustrating her observations and insights. As she spoke, a flicker of surprise crossed Mr. Adams's face, and Maria's encouraging nods bolstered her confidence. Midway through, she took a calculated risk. "I believe that my work as a janitor has offered me a unique perspective on operations and staff morale. By being an integral part of this environment, I understand firsthand the impact of support systems or lack thereof in sustaining motivation." The room grew charged, and for the first time, Sarah noticed a shift in their body language. They leaned forward, their attention sharpened. The fear that had initially gripped her began to ebb, replaced by a sense of purpose and genuine engagement. She could feel the connection forming, a bridge between her world and theirs. When she finished, a palpable silence filled the room again. Mr. Adams appeared thoughtful, his brow furrowing as he considered her words. "You raise some compelling points, Sarah. More than I expected from this meeting. What would you envision as a first step to implement these ideas?" Her heart raced at the question, and she realized this was the moment of truth, a chance to cement her transformation. "I'd like to propose a pilot program where feedback systems are established, driven by voices like mine from the ground up," Sarah said, her words flowing with newfound confidence. "Engaging all voices can lead to innovations no one has considered." As the discussion deepened, Sarah sensed an unfamiliar feeling emerging, a clarity of purpose that had eluded her for years, evolving from fear to empowerment. Yet, a lingering apprehension remained. What awaited her at the conclusion of this dialogue? Would she be seen as an equal collaborator, or merely a footnote in their deliberations? The moment hung in the air, thick with possibilities. Would this lead to her long-desired transformation within the company, or would she leave empty-handed once more? Every unanswered question felt like a storm building, a challenge ready to erupt. Sarah had stepped into this meeting as a janitor. Would she leave with a new identity or slip back into shadows? As Mr. Adams cleared his throat, preparing to respond, Sarah braced herself. The climax of her journey was on the horizon. The tension in the room thickened as Mr. Adams's lips parted, yet no words emerged immediately. His gaze bore into Sarah's, a silent battle brewing behind his steely exterior. In that fleeting moment, vulnerability and hope danced within Sarah, pulling her toward the precipice of action. She could almost feel the weight of expectations pressing against her chest, the hopes of a new identity resting on this singular interaction. "Your proposal," he finally said, his tone now tinged with curiosity, "would involve a lot of change management. Are you prepared to lead such an initiative?" The question struck like a lightning bolt, unearthing every ounce of sorrow and self-doubt that had ever rooted itself within her. Lead? The thought had hardly crossed her mind. She had positioned herself as a contributor, and now the notion of leadership felt exhilarating and daunting in equal measure. The storm inside raged on, questions colliding chaotically. Could she truly navigate the complexities of change? Would they trust her judgment? "Yes, I am," she found herself answering, defiance coloring her voice. "I've seen firsthand how voices from the ground can change outcomes, not just for management but for everyone involved." Mr. Adams's brow furrowed slightly, as if evaluating a puzzle piece just put in place. Maria leaned forward, her expression supportive yet scrutinizing. "Change management is critical, as is staff buy-in. How do you intend to approach that?" Taking a moment to compose her thoughts, Sarah realized this wasn't merely about presenting ideas, it was a call to action. She imagined the workers she interacted with daily, their stories resonated within her, shaping her resolve. "I would start by creating focus groups, small gatherings where employees can freely voice their concerns and ideas, ensuring that we cultivate an inclusive atmosphere. This way, we build trust organically." A flicker of interest crossed Maria's face. "And you believe that could change the culture here?" "Yes, I do," Sarah affirmed, emboldened. "When people feel heard, it reinforces their value within the organization. Imagine the morale boost, the retention rates climbing when employees feel empowered. This isn't just about projects, it's about people." With each word, Sarah felt shackles of insecurity breaking away. She leaned in, engaging more with her audience. The formulas of power were shifting, she felt it in her bones. It was now evident that her unique insights transcended her role as a janitor. She could be the catalyst for change, the fulcrum upon which the organization must pivot. Mr. Adams exchanged a look with the other board member, and Sarah's heart raced, anxiety entwined with a burgeoning sense of self-worth. What would they decide? Would they pull her back into the shadows or propel her into a role she had scarcely dreamed of? The atmosphere crackled with the exhilaration of possibility. "Sarah," Mr. Adams began, his voice low yet firm, "I appreciate your passion. We need someone who can spearhead this initiative. Are you willing to take on this role?" Stunned, she felt the tremors of disbelief threaten to overtake her. Leadership? Responsibility? She took a breath, summoning every moment she'd fought to be visible. "I am. I know I can make a difference." But before she basked in celebration, a thread of fear twisted her thoughts. Would they truly accept her? Would the doubts that whispered incessantly in her mind echo louder in the face of challenge? Would her commitment hold against the potential pushback from others who saw her only as a cleaner? "Very well," Mr. Adams said, a small nod of approval breaking through his stern demeanor. "We'll discuss the logistics internally and set up a follow-up within the next few weeks. Your firefighting spirit will serve you well if you can navigate the waters of skepticism." Relief washed over her, albeit eclipsed by fear of what was to come. She wasn't merely walking a tightrope, she was operating at the edge of a precipice. As the meeting concluded, possibility shimmered like sunlight through the trees. Sarah stood there, her mind racing, imagining the terrain ahead, how to earn respect, confront opposition, and harness the power of a voice long silenced. Before exiting, Maria made her way to Sarah, a reassuring smile gracing her lips. "You've got this, Sarah. Just remember that change often faces resistance. It wasn't easy for me either, but I believe in your potential." Her words resonated as Sarah stepped out of the room, the air swirling with anticipation. What challenges lay ahead? Would she be able to transform not just her life but the lives of those around her? The doorway loomed before her as she took one last glance back, determined to navigate the labyrinth ahead. She stepped into the hallway, each footfall echoing with newfound purpose, ready to face the shifting tides of her reality. But lurking beneath that excitement, uncertainty clawed at her again. Would the tides of skepticism crash over the changes she envisioned, or would she ride the wave of transformation seamlessly? As she walked, the question lingered: what fate awaited her on this uncharted path? As Sarah meandered through the dimly lit corridors of the building, her thoughts spiraled like a tornado. Each footstep echoed her heartbeat, resonating with the profound gravity of the challenge she had just accepted. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of responsibility that now draped over her shoulders. It was a far cry from the simplicity of her former routine, where her primary concern was the cleanliness of the floors. She found a quiet spot near the window, leaning against the cool glass. Outside, the world carried on blissfully unaware of her internal maelstrom. The sun poked through the clouds, reminding her that clarity often emerged after a storm. What did she truly know about leadership? Could she cultivate the trust of her colleagues, many of whom had only known her as the cleaner? The potential for her proposal to create genuine change was intoxicating, yet daunting. Would Richard, the skeptical technician in the mechanical department, see her as a credible leader, or would he resist her initiatives, clinging to the status quo? Her past encounters with his dismissive attitude echoed through her mind, leaving her racked with doubt. Taking a deep breath, she recalled Maria's supportive words. It was time to unpack her fears and turn them into fuel. What made her compelling was not just her insights but her relatability. The very experiences that reduced her in others' eyes had also shaped her resilience. She could channel her journey, one of overcoming obstacles and being unheard, into an asset. Sarah envisioned the first focus group. How could she make it engaging enough for her colleagues to embrace the changes she hoped to introduce? The idea of leading groups filled her with both excitement and trepidation. What if she failed? What if her ideas fell flat? But then, another question took root: what if they succeeded? What if, through her efforts, the employees transformed into active participants in their workplace, no longer relegated to the sidelines? She had already seen glimmers of change when she offered her attention and empathy during mundane conversations. That alone was a testament to her hidden competency as a leader, a skill she could cultivate and enhance. With newfound determination, Sarah returned to her desk. She pulled out her notebook, eager to outline her first steps. Brainstorming potential group topics and considering methods for building rapport felt exhilarating. She wrote down ideas for icebreakers that could bring authenticity to the meetings, along with concepts for fostering open discussions. But as she scribbled, a voice rang louder than her optimism, a familiar, biting critique from her past. "You're just a janitor." The reminder punctured her determination, echoing against the walls of her resolve. The very label she had fought against now crept in to taunt her, a constant antagonist lurking in the shadows of her mind. "No," she whispered to herself, lifting her chin as if defying the voice's authority. Refusing to allow it to forge her path any longer, she pressed her pen to the paper, drafting an email to her potential focus group members. She wove in her vision of inclusivity and support, inviting their insights rather than imposing her will. With every word, the doubt slowly receded, replaced by purpose. She hit send and felt a wave of liberation wash over her. No matter the pushing tides of skepticism, she was ready to navigate them. A plan began to crystallize in her mind, intertwining her fears with strategies for overcoming them, confronting her internal antagonist with decisive action and clarity. The battle within had shifted towards a more formidable ally, and she could see the edges of her transformation taking shape. Just as she finished her email, her phone buzzed, startling her from her reverie. A message from Mr. Adams appeared, confirming the date for the follow-up meeting. That sense of anxiety surged in her, intertwining with excitement. The moment of truth was approaching, where she would present her plan, ideas culminating into a vision, one that might redefine her role and perhaps the culture around her. Would she crumble under pressure, or would she rise above? The stakes had never felt higher, and as she stared at the screen, determination steeled within her. How she would bridge the gap from janitor to leader and confront her inner critic for good loomed ahead as the next hurdle. With her heart racing, she knew the countdown had begun. Soon she'd have to confront not just her colleagues, but the parts of herself that longed for validation amid uncertainty. The tide was shifting, but would she find the strength to ride it? In the days leading up to the meeting, Sarah found herself caught in a whirlwind of preparation. Her notebook became a sanctuary, filled with ideas, strategies, and even reminders to herself of her worth. The abstract concepts of leadership began to crystallize under her pen. It was no longer just about empty titles, it was about fostering a culture of collaboration, empowerment, and innovation among her colleagues. As the clock ticked closer to the meeting, anxiety turned into a steady pulse of determination. Each morning, she dedicated a few moments to visualize her presentation, picturing her colleagues not as skeptics but as a team. Richard's scathing remarks still clung to her mind like stubborn cobwebs, yet she focused on the potential for transformation. She envisioned their support, their engagement, their active participation. When the designated day arrived, Sarah dressed in her best attire, a simple yet professional outfit that felt like armor. She looked in the mirror, forcing a smile. The reflection staring back at her was more than a cleaner, it embodied resilience, conviction, and growth. As she stepped into the meeting room, her heart raced, each beat amplifying her resolve. The room was buzzing with casual chatter. She recognized familiar faces, some warm and welcoming, others gripped in skepticism. Sarah took a deep breath, grounding herself in the moment. There was no going back now. She was here to assert her voice, to lead from her experience, and to share a vision fueled by collaboration. "Thank you all for coming today," she began, her voice firm despite the tremble beneath it. The eyes that turned toward her reflected a mix of curiosity and doubt, but she pressed on. She articulated her proposed changes, not from a place of authority, but as a colleague who genuinely wanted to enhance their work environment. Every topic she presented sparked discussion, igniting a flicker of interest in the room. Ideas ricocheted off the walls, and Sarah felt momentum gathering. She actively encouraged them to share their thoughts, uplifting their insights as if they were co-creators in the forthcoming change. Yet, amidst the energy, Richard's skepticism loomed large. He had been quiet until this moment, observing from the back of the room. When he finally spoke, his voice cut through the enthusiasm like a knife. "Why should we take any directives from someone who, until recently, was just here to keep our floors clean?" The air thickened. Sarah's heart sank momentarily as whispers of disbelief swirled around the room. For a split second, the familiar voice of her inner critic whispered its cruel mantra, echoing Richard's disdain. But beneath the weight of his words, a spark ignited within her, a surge of defiance. "Because we're all more than our titles," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm here today not just as your former cleaner, but as someone who understands the challenges we face and has experienced being unheard. This initiative is for all of us, each one of us has the power to shape our work environment." A hush fell over the room, her words hanging in the air. Ensuing moments felt like an eternity as she gauged their reactions, vulnerability wrapped in hope. Then, a murmur spread as some colleagues nodded in agreement, and a few leaned forward, interested. Sarah continued to foster dialogue, encouraging Richard to elaborate on his concerns. The exchange transformed, it shifted from opposition to constructive criticism. The room felt alive, and for the first time, Sarah realized she was leading a conversation rather than conducting a lecture. As the meeting wound down, a sense of camaraderie unfamiliar to her enveloped the group. The collaborative spirit she envisioned was not just a dream, it was beginning to materialize. Walking out of the meeting, her step felt lighter, buoyed by the collective energy. Yet, as she returned to her desk later, discomfort returned. With success came the fear of failure. Would they continue to support her vision, or would the familiar voices of doubt resurface? Would Richard's cutting words resonate again, or would they evolve into mentorship? The moment of exhilaration soon gave way to a deeper concern over the sustainability of her leadership journey. There was still much to prove, both to her colleagues and to herself. A higher bar had been set. With those thoughts swirling, Sarah knew the next stage was upon her, one that demanded resilience, strategy, and perhaps a confrontation with Richard to pave the way forward. The path ahead faded into uncertainty, and as she sat at her desk, she wondered what the next challenge would bring, one that would test her leadership aspirations, her identity, and the trust she had started to build. Would she finally silence her internal demons, or would they rise once again as the stakes grew higher? The days following the meeting were a mixed whirlwind of exhilaration and tension. Sarah found herself replaying the moments in her mind, clinging to the victories but increasingly wary of the shadows that lurked behind them. Each feedback email from colleagues brought warmth, yet the nagging voice of doubt still whispered insidiously about Richard's words. The transformative spark ignited in the meeting felt delicate, like glass poised on the edge of a table. As she sat at her desk each morning, coffee steaming beside her, Sarah began establishing a routine, one that included not just her tasks but also moments of introspection. With her notebook as her ally, she devoted time to reflecting on what it meant to be a leader, not just in title but in practice. She began to map her abilities, listing her strengths and areas for improvement. This process became a mind-clearing, grounding ritual. One chilly Wednesday, she received an invitation to coffee from a colleague, Ava, whom she had never interacted with much before. Excited yet apprehensive, Sarah accepted, curious about the conversation that might unfold. Over steaming mugs, Ava opened up about her own experiences in the workplace, touching on the barriers she faced as a woman trying to make her voice heard. Sarah listened intently, realizing in those minutes that her own transformation was interconnected with others. This was a critical realization. Leadership wasn't just personal growth, it was also about empowering fellow colleagues to share their voices. But then there it was again. Richard's voice echoed in her mind, raising the question, was she truly capable? After their conversation, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of looming confrontation that awaited her. Richard had been a veteran in the company, a figure with weight behind his words. Would he ever accept her perspective? The next meeting Sarah attended was prepared with an agenda in hand, one that explicitly invited criticism and feedback on team dynamics. She meticulously crafted ways to engage with dissent, hoping to turn potential disruptions into discussions. Her heart raced as she stepped into the room. Richard occupied his usual spot at the back, fingers steepled in an air of authority. As the meeting unfolded, discussions surged and swayed through opinions and ideas, and Sarah felt herself guiding the flow with more confidence. Yet, Richard sat quietly, occasionally throwing skeptical glances and smirks her way. The pulse of the room shifted the moment she turned directly to him during a lull. "Richard, you have valuable insight and experience," she said, anchoring her glance on him. "What are your thoughts on this particular proposal?" A silence followed, a pregnant pause where the weight of anticipation hung thickly. Team members shifted in their chairs, whispers grew anxious. For a moment, Sarah could feel her own resolve chipping away under the pressure of Richard's looming presence. When he finally spoke, it was with an icy blend of sarcasm and challenge. "What I think doesn't matter, Sarah. You're trying to play at being a leader without really knowing what that entails." Her heart sank momentarily, yet beneath that weight, a fierce determination surged anew. "But isn't that the point? To learn as we go? To empower each other rather than just hold our titles?" Before Richard could respond, Ava chimed in, "She's right. We've all got something to contribute, even more if we're in it together." Heads nodded, and the tide began to shift slightly. The breakthrough moment carried her, an electric buoyancy filling the room. Sarah spoke with clarity and conviction in a way that she hadn't before. They were on the cusp of something meaningful: collaboration versus contention. By the time the meeting wrapped up, a sense of unity lingered in the air. Sarah's heart raced with the possibility that this confrontation could transition into an asset rather than a setback. But as she gathered her notes, the excitement flickered momentarily. She knew there would still be tough moments ahead, especially with Richard. The stakes were at an all-time high, and she could feel the current of challenge coursing through her veins. What would be his next play? Would this growing collaboration withstand the inevitable pushback? As the weight of potential confrontation hung overhead, one thing remained clear: Sarah was on a pivot point in her personal ascent, a defining moment where her journey of self-discovery and professional growth was far from complete. The urge to confront Richard directly simmered in her thoughts, but the impending confrontation stirred another trepidation within her. What would that conversation unveil? As Sarah exited the meeting room, she steeled herself for the upcoming battle, questioning whether she had truly prepared for the fight ahead. The morning sun filtered through Sarah's window, warming the space that had once felt like a cage. Each beam illuminated the traces of months-long transformation. The world outside buzzed, but inside, Sarah was grappling with the imminent tide of her future. The anticipation of confronting Richard still loomed large in her mind, casting shadows over her newfound resolve. Yet today was different. Today, she would articulate her position, reclaim her authority. This was not just about a title anymore. Sarah had learned the essence of leadership. It lay in empowering others and uplifting voices. While Richard's skepticism had tethered her spirit for too long, she felt the remnants of fear dissolving, crystallizing instead into purpose. She readied herself, recalling the powerful strategies cultivated during her recent meetings. Just last week, she had invited her team to share their reflections on company culture, allowing her colleagues to reveal where they felt seen or silenced. The responses had been enlightening, each voice a thread woven into the fabric of a new narrative. Sarah realized this wasn't merely about addressing the challenge Richard presented, it was about fortifying the collaborative spirit around her. As she walked toward the office, the familiar sounds of the team greeted her: the laughter, the bustling conversations, the hum of activity that felt unthinkable just months earlier during her days cleaning floors. No longer would she slip unnoticed through hallways, her presence simply a shadow among brighter lights. Today, she would assert herself and bridge gaps that had long hindered both her and her colleagues' progress. In the midday meeting, Sarah took a deep breath. She had finally organized a platform where everyone could express their opinions freely, embracing the idea that their ideas could shape organizational goals. Input session after input session had ignited conversations, creating a buzz of excitement and engagement among her peers. Yet Richard still sat back, waiting for his moment to disrupt. Every eye in the room naturally sought his approval or condemnation. She initiated the meeting confidently, moving right past small talk. "Thank you, everyone, for coming. I've seen how powerful our voices can be when we share. Today, let us create a space for open dialogue. And Richard," she gestured purposefully, "I invite you to lend your insights as well." He leaned back, arms crossed, skepticism radiating from him like a chilling wind. "I'm not here to play a part in your little charade, Sarah," he shot back, his voice laced with condescension. But instead of flinching, Sarah stood her ground. "It's not a charade, Richard. It's an opportunity. Every part of our collective experience is valuable. The aim is not to elevate one voice over another, but to uplift all." As others engaged, sharing their insights and ideas, the dynamic noticeably shifted. Positive energy filled the air. Sarah could see it in their eyes, faces lighting up with the realization that their contributions mattered. Richard, for all his reservations, was slowly being drawn into the rhythm of a new narrative being fashioned before him. "Okay, but where's the accountability in this?" Richard pressed, a hint of frustration edging his tone. "It's right here," she replied, gesturing at the assembled colleagues. "We're building accountability together. By creating structures for feedback, we ensure that no one falls through the cracks. A transparency that we haven't leveraged yet." As discussions erupted around her, the vibration of unity buzzed like a live wire. Sarah's heart raced with excitement. Yes, there was still skepticism, but she noticed fewer dismissive gestures, and the tide was shifting toward collaboration. They were beginning to bridge the divide. So it's about sharing the power, then? Richard finally asked, less confrontational now. Exactly, Sarah said firmly, committing to this train of thought. When we distribute power and involve everyone, we're investing in our culture as a team. A change for each of us means transformative growth. For the entire organization. Suddenly, his posture softened, an awareness dawning. Slowly, other colleagues seemed to rally behind Sarah, encouraging Richard to reframe the narrative. Maybe some of us need to start reevaluating our roles and responsibilities then, Richard acknowledged, albeit grudgingly. In that moment, Sarah felt a monumental shift. She realized that growth isn't merely a linear path, it's an ebb and flow, defined by active participation and mutual respect. The collective conversations had taken root, and Richard's participation felt like a crucial domino falling into place. As finally the meeting drew to a close, Sarah felt invigorated. Day by day, she had laid the foundation of her role as a leader. Challenges would come, like the inevitable confrontation with Richard, testing her resolve, but she now recognized she was not just fighting for herself, she was igniting a movement. Outside the office, the sun set on the horizon, casting a horizon that brimmed with promise. The shadows from earlier were replaced with clarity, a recognition of her strengths and potential anchored in the voices around her. Her journey was not merely her own, it had become a shared saga of resilience. To think she had once been afraid, relegated to cleaning spaces, now stood tall amidst colleagues, advocating for genuine collaboration. "You're ready for this," she murmured to herself, a mantra she would carry into every future conversation and every unfolding chapter. Seizing this moment, Sarah made a mental note to launch an initiative focused on continuous engagement about employee experiences. It would be about more than her story, it would be about every voice feeling heard, a testament to the triumph of the collective over the individual. With that, the timbre of hope echoed through her heart, and Sarah stepped into the unknown with clarity. She was ready, not just to face Richard, but to drive a wave of change across her organization, embracing her role with more confidence than she ever imagined possible. This is her new beginning. Now, it's time for you to join us on this incredible journey. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Comment your reactions and theories about this transformative conclusion. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see Sarah's inspiring journey unfold. This is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second to share.